What if the key to unlocking a lifetime of secrets was sitting on the finger of a stranger? What if a simple, unassuming object held the power to unravel a history of lies, expose a terrible injustice, and reunite a family torn apart by cruelty and greed? For one young waitress, a woman acquainted only with the harsh realities of survival, a single, observant comment was about to change everything. This is a story about a matching pair of silver rings, a question born of innocent curiosity, and a test of character so profound it could either shatter a fragile hope or forge a future of unimaginable vindication. The scent of stale coffee and fried onions was the perfume of Clara's life. It clung to her uniform, her hair, her very skin, a constant reminder of the endless, thankless hours she spent navigating the greasy floors of the Starlight Diner. Each day was a marathon of endurance, a blur of refilling coffee cups, wiping down sticky tables, and forcing a weary smile for customers who rarely saw the person behind the apron. At 26, she felt decades older, her youth eroded by the relentless pressure of overdue bills and the gnawing anxiety for her mother's health. Her mother, Eleanor, was the sun around which Clara's world revolved. She was also the reason for the crushing weight on Clara's shoulders. A degenerative illness was slowly stealing the vibrant, laughing woman Clara remembered from childhood, replacing her with a frail figure confined mostly to the sagging armchair in their tiny apartment. The medical costs were a tidal wave, and Clara's meager paycheck was a flimsy sandcastle against the surge. Every clink of tips in her pocket was not a small victory, but a desperate drop in an ocean of debt. Yet, Clara never faltered in her kindness. She treated the gruffest truck drivers with the same gentle respect as the hurried office workers, her innate decency a quiet rebellion against the harshness of her circumstances. On a Tuesday afternoon, during the slow lull between the lunch rush and the dinner crowd, the bell above the diner door chimed, announcing a customer who seemed utterly out of place. He was an old man, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Clara's annual rent. His face was a roadmap of deep lines, his eyes a pale, weary blue that seemed to hold the weight of a long and complicated history. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, leaning heavily on a silver-handled cane, and chose a booth in the far corner, away from the windows, as if seeking refuge from the world. Clara grabbed a menu and a glass of water, her server's autopilot engaged. "Welcome to the Starlight," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" The man didn't look at the menu. His gaze was distant, fixed on some point beyond the diner's grimy walls. "Just black coffee," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. She returned moments later with a steaming mug. As she set it down on the table, her eyes were inadvertently drawn to his hand resting beside it. It was an old hand, spotted with age, but the fingers were long and elegant. On his right ring finger, he wore a piece of jewelry that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a silver ring, but not just any ring. It was a thick band, intricately carved with the design of a rose stem, complete with delicate thorns, wrapping around a single, deep blue sapphire that glittered like a captured star. It was identical, absolutely identical to the one her mother kept in a small, velvet-lined box on her dresser. The ring Eleanor never wore but would sometimes hold, her expression a mixture of profound love and unbearable sadness. Clara froze, the coffee pot in her hand hovering over his cup. The world seemed to narrow to that single, impossible object. All the rules of customer service, all her professional detachment, evaporated in a rush of shock and disbelief. The words tumbled out of her before she could stop them, a whisper of pure astonishment. "Sir," she said, her voice barely audible, "forgive me for staring, but my mom has the same ring." The old man's head snapped up. His pale blue eyes, which had been so distant and clouded, were suddenly sharp, focused, and piercing. They locked onto hers with a startling intensity. He looked from her face down to the ring on his finger and then back to her, his composure cracking like thin ice. A flicker of something, confusion, then shock, then a dawning, terrifying recognition, passed across his features. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His hand began to tremble, rattling the coffee cup against the saucer. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time, her wide, honest brown eyes, the gentle curve of her jaw, the determined set of her mouth. It was as if he were looking at a ghost, a phantom from a dream he'd long since forgotten. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a waxy, ashen gray. His breath hitched, a ragged, painful sound in the quiet diner. He clutched his chest, his knuckles white. "Eleanor?" he rasped, the name a broken shard of sound. And then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed. The great Alistair Finch, the reclusive titan of industry, slumped sideways in the vinyl booth of a greasy spoon diner, brought down not by a market crash or a corporate takeover, but by the quiet words of a waitress and the impossible sight of a ghost from his past. The clatter of the falling coffee pot shattered the diner's sleepy quiet. Clara rushed forward, her own shock momentarily eclipsed by a surge of adrenaline. "Somebody call 911, she yelled, her voice trembling as she knelt beside the unconscious billionaire, her world irrevocably tilted on its axis. The ring on his finger seemed to burn with a cold, blue fire, a beacon signaling the end of her life as she knew it and the beginning of a mystery that would consume her whole. Paramedics arrived with a practiced, chaotic efficiency, their voices a calm counterpoint to the frantic energy that now filled the Starlight Diner. Clara gave a statement to a police officer, her words stumbling as she tried to explain the inexplicable. She recounted the man's last whispered word, her mother's name. The officer scribbled it down with a dispassionate nod, but for Clara, the name hung in the air, a question mark forged in iron. A sleek black car, the kind that whispered of wealth and power, soon pulled up outside. A younger man in an impeccably tailored suit, his face a mask of controlled panic, emerged and strode into the diner. He introduced himself as Marcus Thorne, Mr. Finch's nephew. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over Clara, dismissing her as part of the dingy scenery. He spoke in clipped, authoritative tones, handling the police and paramedics, ensuring his uncle was taken to the best private hospital in the city. As they were wheeling Alistair Finch out on a gurney, his eyes fluttered open for a brief moment. They found Clara's in the crowd of onlookers. His hand, frail and trembling, lifted slightly, his fingers weakly gesturing towards her. "The ring," he breathed, his voice a faint, desperate thread of sound. "Bring me the ring." Marcus Thorne's sharp gaze followed his uncle's, and a flicker of irritation crossed his features. He stepped in front of Clara, blocking her from Alistair's view. "My uncle is disoriented," he said, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of steel. "Thank you for your help." It was a clear dismissal. He turned and followed the gurney out, leaving Clara standing amidst the shattered remains of a quiet afternoon. Clara finished her shift in a daze, her movements automatic, her mind replaying the scene over and over. The identical ring, the whispered name, the collapse. It felt like a scene from a movie, too dramatic and surreal to be her life. That evening, she sat by her mother's side, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she slept. The velvet box was on the nightstand. With trembling fingers, Clara opened it. There it was, the silver band, the intertwined rose and thorn, the deep blue sapphire. It was a perfect match. She had asked about it once as a child. Eleanor had simply smiled a sad, distant smile and said, "It was a gift from someone who believed in fairy tales." She never elaborated, and Clara learned not to press. The ring was a relic from a life her mother never spoke of, a locked room in her heart. The next morning, a courier arrived at her apartment. He handed her a crisp, heavy envelope bearing the logo of Finch Enterprises. Inside was a letter, typed on thick, creamy stationery, and a check for $5,000. The letter was from a personal assistant, formally requesting her presence at Mr. Finch's corporate headquarters that afternoon. It stated that Mr. Finch had recovered and wished to speak with her about a matter of personal significance. The check, it explained, was for her time and trouble. $5,000. It was more money than Clara had seen in one place in her entire life. It was 2 months of rent. It was a down payment on the mountain of medical debt. It was a breath of air when she was drowning. But it was also unsettling. It felt less like a compensation and more like a summons, a purchase. Her mother was awake when Clara showed her the letter. Eleanor's eyes, clouded with fatigue, scanned the words. When she saw the name Finch, a tremor went through her hand. "Alistair," she whispered, the name like a forgotten melody. "You knew him, Mom? The man from the diner." Eleanor looked away, her gaze fixed on the water-stained ceiling. "I knew an Alistair Finch a long time ago. A different man. A boy with dreams in his eyes. Not a billionaire in a suit." Her voice was frail, heavy with unspoken history. "He gave me the ring. He said we were the rose and the thorn, forever intertwined. He said it was a promise." "What happened?" Clara pressed gently. A shadow passed over her mother's face. "Promises get broken, baby. Life gets in the way. Powerful families get in the way." She closed her eyes. "Be careful, Clara. Money like that, it doesn't come without sharp edges." Clara clutched the letter. The $5,000 was a lifeline. But her mother's words, her palpable pain, had shifted something inside her. This was no longer just about a strange coincidence or a potential windfall. It was about the deep, unhealed wound in her mother's past. It was about the name that had shattered a powerful man's composure. She made her decision. She would go, not just for the money, but for the truth. She carefully placed her mother's ring in the velvet box and put it in her purse. It felt heavier than it ever had before, weighted with the gravity of unanswered questions and a past that was suddenly, terrifyingly, alive. Later that day, clutching her worn handbag, Clara stood before the Finch Enterprises tower, a monolith of black glass and steel that clawed at the sky. It was a monument to a world entirely alien to her, a world of power, influence, and unimaginable wealth. The lobby was a cavern of polished marble and hushed reverence. Men and women in sharp suits moved with a brisk, silent purpose, their faces set with ambition. Clara, in her best, but still faded dress, felt like a sparrow that had wandered into an eagle's nest. An immaculately dressed woman at the reception desk directed her to a private elevator. The ride to the penthouse was silent and swift, a smooth, frictionless ascent that felt like leaving the real world behind. The doors opened directly into a vast office. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of the city sprawling below. The 4th was lined with books. In the center of the room, behind a desk of dark, gleaming with the size of Clara's kitchen table, sat Alistair Finch. He was not in a suit today, but in a simple cashmere sweater. He looked older, more fragile than he had in the diner, but his eyes were clear and intensely focused on her. He was not alone. Marcus Thorne stood near the window, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of impatience and unconcealed disdain. "Miss Morales," Alistair said, his voice softer than she remembered. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." He gestured to a leather armchair that was more comfortable than her bed. Clara sat on the edge of the seat, her back straight. She felt the weight of Marcus's stare like a physical pressure. "I apologize for the scene I caused yesterday," Alistair began. "It has been a long time since I was so surprised." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "You said your mother has a ring like mine. May I see it?" Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. She reached into her purse, her fingers closing around the cool velvet of the box. She placed it on the desk and pushed it gently towards him. Alistair's hands trembled as he opened it. He stared at the ring, his breath catching. He then held up his own hand, placing his ring beside it. They were perfect twins. The same silver, the same intricate carving, the same deep blue sapphire. A matched set. "There were only 2 of these ever made," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked up at Clara, his eyes searching her face. "I gave this to a woman named Eleanor Vance. I loved her more than my own life, His gaze was unwavering. "Tell me about your mother." Before Clara could answer, Marcus stepped forward. "Uncle, this is absurd. It's a coincidence. Clever one, perhaps. This woman's diner is only a few blocks from here. It wouldn't be hard for someone to research you, to find out about your past, to procure a replica." "Marcus, be silent," Alistair said, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that made his nephew flinch. He did not take his eyes off Clara. "My mother's name is Eleanor Morales now," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But she was born Eleanor Vance. She's not well. She lives with me in a small apartment in the East End." Alistair closed his eyes, a look of profound pain crossing his face. "East End," he repeated softly. I was told she died. In a car accident. Nearly 30 years ago." The air in the room grew thick with the weight of his words. A lie that had lasted for decades. Clara felt a chill crawl up her spine. This was bigger than a broken promise. This was a deliberate, cruel deception. "She's very much alive," Clara said, a new strength hardening her voice. "She's a fighter. She's been fighting her whole life." Alistair opened his eyes. They were shining with unshed tears. "I believe you," he whispered. He seemed to shrink in his chair, the powerful billionaire suddenly just a heartbroken old man. "Someone lied to me. For 30 years. I have mourned a woman who was alive. I need to understand." He reached for a phone on his desk. "Helen," he said into the receiver. "Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the week. And get Robert Sterling on the line. Now." He hung up and looked at Clara. "Robert is my lawyer. And my oldest friend. We are going to find out what happened." He then did something that surprised her. He opened a drawer in his desk, took out a checkbook, and wrote another check. This one was for $100,000. He slid it across the desk. "This is not a payment to make you go away," he said, his voice firm. "This is for your mother's medical care. Whatever she needs. The best doctors, the best treatments. No expenses spared. Consider it a down payment on a debt I never knew I owed." Marcus scoffed from the window. "Uncle, you're being played for a fool. You can't just throw money at this grifter." Clara stood up, her dignity a shield against his venom. She looked not at the check, but directly into Alistair's eyes. "Mr. Finch, I appreciate this. My mother needs it. But what I want, what she deserves, is the truth. Money can't buy back the years that were stolen from you both." Alistair nodded slowly, a look of deep respect dawning on his face. He saw not an opportunist, but a young woman of incredible strength and integrity. A woman fighting for her mother's honor. "You are right, Miss Morales," he said. "You are absolutely right." He looked past her, his gaze landing on his nephew with a new, cold clarity. "And I will tear down anyone who stands in the way of that truth." The penthouse office, once a symbol of intimidating power, now felt like the headquarters for a search mission. A mission into the past. Alistair Finch, galvanized by a purpose he hadn't felt in decades, had transformed. The weary, reclusive billionaire was gone, replaced by a man on a hunt, his mind sharp and his resources infinite. He'd introduced Clara to Robert Sterling, a kind-eyed lawyer with a calm demeanor that belied a formidable intelligence. Robert treated Clara not as an intruder, but as a client, a person whose story mattered. The first step was a conversation, a deep dive into Eleanor's life. Clara sat with Alistair and Robert, recounting everything she knew. It wasn't much. Her mother had always been a closed book about her past. She'd worked 2, sometimes 3 low-wage jobs to raise Clara alone. She never spoke of Clara's father, and when asked, would only say that he was gone. She had moved to the city from a small town upstate, a place she never returned to. She had no family to speak of. Her life was a story with the first few chapters ripped out. "She never mentioned my name?" Alistair asked, his voice laced with a pain that was almost physical. "No, sir," Clara answered honestly. "I never knew your name until yesterday. She only ever talked about the ring and the man who gave it to her as a a fairy tale. A dream she once had. Alistair flinched as if struck. A dream, he repeated hollowly. She thought I abandoned her. She must have. He looked at Robert. My father. It had to have been my father. He despised her. He called her a beautiful distraction, a social liability. He told me she was beneath us. Your father was a formidable man, Alistair, Robert said cautiously. And he controlled every aspect of your life back then. It's a plausible theory. The theory, however, needed proof. Alistair led them to a room Clara hadn't noticed before, a library off the main office. It was a climate-controlled archive, filled with filing cabinets and leather-bound ledgers. It was the physical record of the Finch dynasty. My father was meticulous, Alistair explained, running a hand over a steel cabinet. He documented everything. If he orchestrated this, there will be a trail. While Alistair and Robert began the daunting task of sifting through old financial records and correspondence, Marcus Thorne stewed. He had been banished from the office but lingered in the executive suite, his presence a toxic cloud of resentment. He saw his carefully constructed world, his inheritance, his future, being threatened by a waitress from a rundown diner. To him, Clara was not a person with a story. She was a variable, a problem to be managed and, if necessary, eliminated. He cornered Clara when she stepped out to get a glass of water. He moved with a predator's silence, suddenly just there, blocking her path. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, he began, his voice a low, menacing purr. But it ends now. My uncle is an old man. He's sentimental, easily manipulated by a pretty face and a sob story. Clara stood her ground, her chin held high. This isn't a game. It's my mother's life. Marcus laughed, a short, ugly sound. Your mother's life, he sneered. Let's talk about her life. I had my people do a little digging. Eleanor Morales. A string of dead-end jobs. Eviction notices. A mountain of medical debt. A charity case. And you following right in her footsteps. Pouring coffee for pocket change, he took a step closer, invading her personal space. Is that what this is about? A lottery ticket? You see the name Finch and your eyes turn into dollar signs. The cruelty of his words was like a slap. He was twisting her hardship into a weapon, painting her desperation as greed. A hot surge of anger rose in her, but she forced it down, her voice remaining level. You don't know anything about me or my mother, she said. You see our struggle and you call it a weakness. I call it survival. Something you, in your glass tower, could never understand. His eyes narrowed. I understand opportunity. And I'm going to give you 1 inch. He pulled a folded check from his jacket pocket and held it out to her. This is for $250,000. It's yours. All you have to do is walk away. Tell my uncle you made a mistake. That the rings were just a coincidence. Disappear, and this money will solve all your problems. Clara stared at the check. It was a staggering sum, a life-altering amount of money. It was safety. It was security. It was the best care in the world for her mother. It was an end to the sleepless nights and the constant, grinding worry. For a fleeting second, the temptation was immense, a siren song of easy relief. She could take it and all the pain would stop. But then she thought of her mother's face when she spoke of the broken promise. She thought of Alistair's eyes when he learned Eleanor was alive. She thought of the 30 years of lies that had been built between them. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice. My mother's dignity isn't for sale, she said, her voice ringing with a clarity and force that surprised them both. And neither is mine. Marcus's face contorted with fury. He snatched the check back, his mask of civility crumbling. You stupid, foolish girl, he hissed. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You will regret this. I will personally tear you down, and I will enjoy every second of it. He stormed away, leaving Clara shaken but resolute. The confrontation had been ugly, but it had solidified her purpose. Marcus wasn't just a cynical nephew, he was an active threat. His hostility was too personal, too venomous. It wasn't just about protecting his inheritance. felt like he was hiding something. She returned to the archive, her resolve hardened. Alastair and Robert were poring over an old, dusty correspondence box. Alastair looked up as she entered, his face pale. "We found something," he said, his voice strained. He pushed the box towards her. It was filled with letters, dozens of them, tied in faded ribbon. The envelopes were addressed to Miss Eleanor Vance at an old address upstate. They were in Alastair's own elegant handwriting, and across every single one, stamped in harsh red ink, were the words, "Return to sender. Addressee deceased." Clara's hand went to her mouth. "You wrote to her." "Every week," Alastair whispered, his eyes filled with a fresh wave of grief. "For a year after I was told she was gone. I couldn't accept it. I poured my heart out to her, telling her I would never love again. And all this time, they were sending them back. They never even left the city." Robert pointed to the return address on the envelopes. It wasn't Alastair's personal address. It was the Finch Enterprises mailroom. Someone intercepted these, Alastair. Someone within the company. They were returned before they were ever sent. The discovery was a bombshell. This was no longer a matter of a father's disapproval. This was a conspiracy. A cold, calculated, and cruel plot to keep two people apart. It was proof of a meticulous deception. Alastair stared at the letters, at the tangible evidence of the lies that had shaped his life. The love he thought he had lost, the grief he had carried for 30 years. It was all built on a foundation of deceit. "My father," Alastair said, his voice a low growl of dawning fury. "He controlled the mailroom. He controlled everything." He looked at Clara, his expression a mixture of rage and profound sorrow. "They didn't just lie to me. They stole our lives. They stole your mother from me, and they stole me from her." He paused, his gaze intensifying as he truly looked at her, at the daughter he never knew he had. "And in doing so," he said, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow, "they stole you from me too." The weight of that stolen history settled in the room, heavy and suffocating. The letters were not just paper and ink. They were ghosts of a life that should have been. For Alastair, they were a testament to a love he thought was dead. For Clara, they were the first chapter of a story she was never told, the story of a father she never knew. The hunt for the truth had become deeply personal, and the stakes had just been raised to an unbearable height. The discovery of the intercepted letters sent a shockwave through Alastair. The grief he had harbored for decades curdled into a cold, hard rage. He was no longer just a man searching for answers. He was a man seeking retribution for a theft of immeasurable value, the theft of a life, a love, a child. He and Robert Sterling began a forensic dissection of his father's, the formidable Augustus Finch's, private records. They worked with a feverish intensity, digging through ledgers, journals, and private correspondence that hadn't seen the light of day in 30 years. Clara, meanwhile, found herself in a strange new reality. She was no longer just a waitress. Alastair had insisted she stay, not as an employee, but as a partner in this investigation. He had moved her and Eleanor into a comfortable suite in a luxury residential hotel owned by his company, ensuring Eleanor had round-the-clock nursing care. For the first time, Clara didn't have to worry about rent or medical bills. But the relief was overshadowed by the emotional turmoil of the unfolding mystery. During the day, she would sit with Alastair and Robert, helping them piece together the timeline of her mother's life, providing the small details she knew, which suddenly seemed like crucial puzzle pieces. In the evenings, she would sit with her mother. Eleanor was stronger now, with proper care and nutrition, but the revelations had taken a toll. The past she had buried so deeply was being unearthed, and it was a painful process. "He was a good man, your Alastair," Eleanor said one evening, her voice soft and distant as she looked out the window at the city lights. "He had a poet's soul trapped in a businessman's world. His father, Augustus, he was a different creature entirely. He was made of iron and ice. He saw me as a flaw in his perfect blueprint for Alastair's life." She turned to Clara, her eyes glistening. "He told me Alastair had agreed to the separation. that he had chosen the family business, the family name, over me. He offered me money to disappear and I was young and heartbroken and I believed him. How could I not? A man like that, you don't doubt his power. The lie told to Eleanor was the perfect, cruel mirror image of the lie told to Alistair. It was a prison with two cells, each convinced the other had abandoned them. While this quiet, painful excavation of the past was happening in the suite, Marcus Thorne was waging a war. Furious at Clara's rejection of his payoff and terrified of what Alistair might uncover, he began a campaign of sabotage. He used his position within Finch Enterprises to create obstacles, to cast doubt. He leaked a carefully spun version of the story to a notorious gossip columnist. A tale of a conniving young woman attempting to defraud a vulnerable old billionaire. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation and character assassination. It painted Clara as a calculating gold digger, using her mother as a pawn in a high-stakes scam. It mentioned her financial struggles, her diner job, twisting her poverty into proof of her corrupt motives. Clara woke one morning to find her face splashed across the internet, her name dragged through the mud. The public humiliation was searing. Old acquaintances called, some in sympathy, others with suspicion in their voices. Her boss at the diner, a man she'd worked for 5 years, left a curt voicemail telling her not to bother coming back, citing the unwanted attention she was bringing to his establishment. She was devastated. She felt exposed, violated. She had been so focused on uncovering the lies of the past that she hadn't prepared for the lies being manufactured in the present. She went to Alistair, the tabloid printout trembling in her hand, ready to tell him she couldn't do this anymore, that she just wanted to take her mother and hide. Alistair took one look at the article, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. He read the poisonous words, the thinly veiled accusations. Then he looked at Clara, at the hurt and humiliation in her eyes. "This is Marcus's work," he said, his voice dangerously low. "He is trying to break you. He is trying to isolate you, to make you run. He is doing exactly what my father did to your mother." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. "When I was a young man, I let my father control the narrative. I let him tell me who to be, who to love, what to believe. I was a coward. I believed his lies because it was easier than fighting him." He turned back to face her, his eyes blazing with a fire she hadn't seen before. "I will not make that mistake again, and I will not let you be broken by these tactics. This is not just a test of my resolve anymore, Clara. It is a test of yours. Marcus has offered you a choice. You can run from his lies, or you can stand with me and fight for the truth. He thinks your spirit is as poor as your bank account. He is daring you to prove him right." His words struck a chord deep within her. He was right. Running was exactly what Marcus wanted. It would be an admission of guilt. It would mean letting him win, letting his poison taint her mother's story forever. All her life she had endured. She had quietly weathered every storm, every hardship. But this was different. This was a fight not just for survival but for honor. She straightened her shoulders, the tremor in her hands ceasing. She met Alistair's intense gaze with one of her own. "He's wrong about me," she said, her voice quiet but filled with a new, unshakable strength. "He's wrong about my mother. I'm not running." A slow, proud smile spread across Alistair's face. "I knew it," he said, a deep satisfaction in his voice. "You have your mother's fire. Augustus Finch couldn't extinguish it, and his pathetic grandson won't either." That moment was a turning point. Clara transformed from a passive victim of circumstance into an active participant in her own destiny. The public scorn, intended to break her, had instead forged her in steel. She had faced the ultimate temptation, an easy escape, and the ultimate intimidation, public ruin, and had chosen the harder path. She had chosen truth over comfort, honor over safety. She had passed the test. And her decision lit a fire under Alistair. He turned to Robert Sterling. "Enough digging," he commanded. "It's time to blast. I want you to file a lawsuit against every media outlet that ran that story for defamation."
Spero no pense.
and I want you to convene an emergency meeting of the board of directors for tomorrow morning. It's time we dealt with the rot in my family, and in my company, once and for all." The air in the penthouse crackled with a new energy. The time for quiet investigation was over. The battle was about to begin. Clara, the waitress from the Starlight Diner, stood beside the billionaire titan, no longer just a catalyst for his journey into the past, but his ally in the war for their future. The dam of the past didn't just crack. It burst. The breakthrough came not from a ledger or a letter, but from a place far more personal and damning: Augustus Finch's private journals. Robert Sterling found them locked in a safe hidden behind a false panel in the archive library, a place Alastair never knew existed. They were a series of leather-bound books, filled with Augustus's sharp, precise script, detailing not just his business dealings, but his cold, calculating philosophy on life, legacy, and family. Alastair, Robert, and Clara sat around the massive desk, the journals spread before them like an indictment. Alastair read the entries from 30 years ago aloud, his voice growing more strained with each word. Augustus wrote of Eleanor with a chilling detachment, referring to her as the asset or the complication. He detailed his plan with the pride of a master strategist executing a flawless corporate maneuver. "The Vance girl is proving to be a persistent distraction," Alastair read, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Alastair is besotted. He speaks of marriage, an unacceptable outcome, a dilution of the bloodline, and a threat to the strategic alliances I have planned for him. The situation requires a permanent solution." The entries that followed were a cold-blooded chronicle of the conspiracy. Augustus detailed his meetings with Eleanor, the pressure he applied, the lies he spun about Alastair's supposed change of heart. He wrote of paying her a paltry $10,000, a trivial sum to secure a billion-dollar future, and threatening her with ruin if she ever tried to contact Alastair again. He documented the faking of the accident report, the creation of a forged death certificate, and the system he put in place to intercept Alastair's letters. He had enlisted the help of a young, ambitious junior partner at his law firm, a man desperate to prove his loyalty, a man named Richard Thorne, Marcus Thorne's father. The betrayal was generational, a poison passed from father to son. Then came the final, devastating entry, the one that made Alastair stop, his hand trembling so violently he could no longer hold the book. Clara took it from him and read the last lines aloud, her own voice barely a whisper. "A final complication has been handled. Thorne reports the girl was with child. A regrettable but necessary collateral detail. The payment has been made, the file is closed. The Finch legacy is secure." The room fell into a dead, ringing silence. With child, pregnant. Clara looked up from the page, her eyes meeting Alastair's. The air left her lungs. The unspoken truth, the impossible, earth-shattering reality, hung between them. All the pieces clicked into place. Her mother's fierce, solitary struggle, the absence of a father, her own age. It all pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Alastair stared at her, his face a canvas of shock, horror, and a dawning wondrous light. He saw it now in the curve of her jaw, the intensity in her eyes, not just a resemblance to Eleanor, but a reflection of himself. "My God!" he breathed, the words catching in his throat. "Eleanor, you are my daughter." The revelation was a physical force, knocking the breath from Clara's body. A daughter, his daughter. The words echoed in the vast emptiness of her life where a father should have been. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock, of grief for the lost years, of a strange, terrifying joy. She wasn't just the descendant of a tragic love story. She was the living, breathing result of it. Alastair stumbled from his chair and came around the desk. He stopped in front of her, his hands hovering unsure, as if she were a mirage he was afraid to touch. "All these years," he choked out, his own tears tracing paths through the lines on his face. "I had a daughter, I had a family, and I never knew." He reached out, his trembling fingers gently touching her cheek. In that touch, 30 years of lies dissolved. The waitress and the billionaire were gone. There was only a father and a daughter, finding each other across a chasm of time and deceit. Clara leaned into his touch, a sob escaping her lips, and for the first time in her life, she felt the profound, anchoring weight of a father's presence. The emergency board meeting was convened in a sterile, intimidating room on the top floor of the Finch Tower. The long, polished table was surrounded by stern-faced men and women in dark suits, the guardians of the Finch Empire. They murmured amongst themselves, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and irritation at the unscheduled summons. Marcus Thorne was already there, seated near the head of the table that was rightfully Alistair's. He looked smug, confident, believing this meeting was about the bad press, a chance for him to further paint Clara as a threat and solidify his own position as Alistair's sensible, protective heir. The doors opened, and Alistair Finch entered. But he was not alone. On one side was his lawyer, Robert Sterling, carrying a thick briefcase. On the other was Clara Morales. Her presence sent a ripple of shock through the room. She was not dressed as a waitress, but in a simple, elegant dark blue dress Alistair's assistant had provided. She looked poised, her nervousness hidden beneath a layer of quiet determination. She met Marcus's stunned, malevolent glare without flinching. "Good morning," Alistair began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was cold, hard, and resonant with authority. He remained standing at the head of the table. "I have called this meeting to address a matter of profound personal and corporate corruption. A corruption that has festered within my family and this company for 3 decades. Marcus started to speak. "Uncle, if this is about that unfortunate tabloid story, it is about the truth behind that story, Marcus." Alistair cut him off, his eyes like chips of ice. "A truth you have worked very hard to keep buried." What followed was not a meeting, but a judgment. Alistair laid out the story, piece by damning piece. He spoke of his love for Eleanor Vance. He presented the intercepted letters, passing them around the table for the board members to see. He read the most damning excerpts from his father's journals, his voice ringing with the righteous fury of a man robbed of his life. The room was silent, the board members' faces shifting from confusion to shock to horror. And then, Alistair looked directly at Clara. "My father's journal," he said, his voice softening for a moment before hardening again, also revealed that when he and his accomplice forced Eleanor away, she was pregnant. He documented this fact as collateral detail. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Board members, I would like to introduce you to my daughter, Clara." A collective gasp went through the room. Marcus's face went white. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. "This is a lie," he sputtered, jumping to his feet. "It's a fantasy. He's an old man, and she's a con artist who has poisoned his mind. There's no proof." "Oh, but there is, Marcus," Robert Sterling said calmly, stepping forward. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a file. "This is the sworn affidavit of your father, Richard Thorne. He gave it to me a week before he died of cancer last year." Marcus froze, his mouth hanging open. Robert continued, his voice even and relentless. "Richard had a crisis of conscience. He couldn't bear to die with this secret on his soul. He confessed everything. His role in helping Augustus separate you and Eleanor. His role in maintaining the lie for years. And he confessed that he told you, Marcus, all of it on his deathbed. He made you promise to one day tell your uncle the truth." All eyes in the room turned to Marcus. He was trapped, exposed, the walls of his lies crumbling around him. He was rambling, Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. He was on morphine. He didn't know what he was saying. "So you knew," Alistair said, his voice a deadly whisper. "When you saw Clara in my office, when you saw the ring, you knew exactly who she was. Every word you spoke against her, every action you took to discredit her, was not to protect me from a stranger. It was to protect yourself from the truth. It was to protect your inheritance." Cornered and desperate, Marcus's arrogance became his undoing. He dropped the pretense, his face twisting into a sneer of pure contempt. Protect my inheritance? Of course, I was protecting what is rightfully mine. I've dedicated my life to this company, to this family, while you were locked away in your penthouse mourning a ghost. And for what? So you could give it all away to some waitress? The bastard child of a woman who wasn't good enough to carry our name? She doesn't belong here. My father and my grandfather did what was necessary to protect the Finch legacy. And I was doing the same. His confession, spat out with all the venom and entitlement he possessed, hung in the air, more damning than any journal entry or affidavit. He had admitted everything. The board members stared at him, their faces masks of disgust. He had not only confirmed his complicity but revealed the depths of his own moral bankruptcy. Alistair looked at his nephew, not with anger anymore, but with a profound, weary pity. You are not my father, Marcus. You are a pale, pathetic imitation. He was a monster, but he was a builder. You are just a scavenger. He turned to the board. Effective immediately, Marcus Thorne is terminated from all positions at Finch Enterprises. His shares are to be frozen, pending a full investigation into corporate fraud. I am disowning him. He is no longer a part of my family. He looked back at Marcus, his face grim. Get out. Get out of my building, and get out of my sight. Marcus stood there for a moment, his face a ruin of shock and hatred. Then, with a strangled cry of rage, he swept his arm across the table, sending glasses and papers flying, before turning and storming out of the room. A man who had just lost everything because he, like his father and grandfather before him, had underestimated the power of truth and the resilience of love. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing like a final, definitive judgment. Justice, when it finally arrived, was not a clap of thunder but a quiet dawn. With Marcus gone, the poison was drained from the heart of the company. Alistair, with Clara by his side, began the work of setting things right. The lawsuit against the tabloids resulted in swift, public retractions and apologies, clearing Clara's name completely. Marcus, facing legal action for fraud and disinherited, vanished from the high society circles he so cherished, a pariah undone by his own greed. But the true resolution was not found in a boardroom or a courtroom. It was found in a quiet, sunlit room where Eleanor was recovering. Alistair and Clara went to her together, the full truth now laid bare. Clara told her mother everything, the journals, the confession, the fact that Alistair was her father. Eleanor listened, tears streaming down her face, tears not of sorrow, but of release. The burden of the lie she had been told, that she had been abandoned and forgotten, was finally lifted. She looked at Alistair, the man she had loved as a girl, now an old man with the same kind eyes she remembered. You came back, she whispered. I never left, Eleanor, Alistair said, his own voice thick with emotion as he took her hand. In my heart, I never left. They stole 30 years from us. I can't get them back. But I can give you the rest of my life. The reunion was a fragile, beautiful thing. It was filled with tears and apologies, with the shared pain of what was lost and the tentative hope for what could be built. Alistair immediately took over Eleanor's care, bringing in the world's best specialists. Her health, buoyed by relief from financial stress and the healing power of her rediscovered love, began to improve dramatically. Clara's life was transformed. The crushing weight of poverty was gone, replaced by a sense of security she had never known. But the money was secondary. What she had gained was so much more precious. A family. She had a father who looked at her with a mixture of awe and profound love, trying to make up for a lifetime of absence in every small gesture. He learned that she loved to paint, a passion she'd long since abandoned as an unaffordable luxury. He had a studio built for her, filled with every canvas and color she could imagine. They moved out of the city, away from the glass tower and the ghosts of the past. Alistair bought a beautiful home in the countryside, a place with sprawling gardens and warm, sun-filled rooms. It was a home, not a mansion. Eleanor, growing stronger each day, would sit in the garden with Alistair, the two of them talking for hours, rebuilding the bridge across their stolen years. Clara would watch them from her studio window, her heart full. The matching silver rings, one now on Alistair's hand, the other back in its velvet box on Eleanor's dresser, were no longer symbols of a broken promise, but of a love that had endured the ultimate test. Months later, on a warm autumn afternoon, the three of them were walking through the garden. Eleanor was walking without a cane, a genuine, radiant smile on her face. Alistair looked years younger, the weary weight lifted from his shoulders. Clara walked between them, her life no longer a struggle for survival, but a canvas of possibility. She had found more than a father and a fortune. She had found her own history. She had reclaimed her mother's honor. She had learned that her own resilience, her kindness, her integrity, the very qualities that Marcus had mocked as weaknesses, were, in fact, her greatest strengths. They were the inheritance her mother had given her, more valuable than any stock portfolio. This story, which began with a chance encounter in a greasy spoon diner, had become a testament to the enduring power of truth. It reminds us that the past is never truly buried, and that the invisible threads of love and connection can withstand even the most calculated cruelty. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the strength of the human spirit, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that celebrates hope, justice, and the unbreakable bonds of family.